All righty. All right. Welcome to the BeGreat Inspiration Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cook, and tonight we have a special guest, and I hope you guys enjoy this. At this time, I would like to thank Adam Winkler for joining the show. Welcome, Adam.
Chris, thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure.
Yes, sir. So, as we talked about before, one of the things that we talked about, you getting on the podcast was, just the fact of being self-made. And so my question would be to you then, what's the definition of self-made to you?
Well, it's a great question. And, generally when we think about someone being self-made, as a self-made man or a self-made woman, we're generally thinking about someone who comes from nothing, that has no means, grows up without any family wealth or opportunity, and they go out and make something of themselves and they become a success. And to the extent that's what self-made means, I'm probably not the best self-made example out there. I grew up in a wealthy family. I had every privilege and advantage you can have. Long before everyone was talking about white privilege, I was enjoying a lot of it, to be honest with you. So
Right.
I've had a lot of privileges in my background. And, for me, it's about appreciating those privileges, appreciating those opportunities, and making the most out of them. And for me, being self-made is not so much that I did it on my own, because I didn't. It takes a village, and I had a village. But for me, being self-made is more about finding my own path, finding the path that suits me, that allows me to flourish as a person. And in my family, everyone is in the film business. My father's a filmmaker. I have two older brothers. Both of them were in the film business. They were all destined to go and be in the film business. And I just knew I wanted to create my own path. I wanted to find a pathway for me that satisfied my emotions, my desires, my goals. And it wasn't in the film business. And so I went out and did something different. I went and became an academic, became a law professor at UCLA, and really pursued a different lifestyle than the one that was sort of handed to me when I was young. And so in some ways, my career choices have been somewhat self-made,
Right.
even if myself as a person, I've had plenty of opportunities.
Right. So that's awesome. That's awesome. That's why I wanted to hear, what you had to say and what your thoughts was, because like you said, we all have a village, we all have people in a community that we need. And I think that's the key, just not being successful in a financial way, but just being, successful emotionally, physically, spiritually. Like we all need that connection. So I really appreciate your definition on that. That was awesome. So just tell me a little bit, about your experience of growing in Beverly Hills and being the youngest, of the youngest son of your parents. And then, did your older brothers mess with you much?
Mhm. Well, so like if you think of a movie or of a TV show, and it's like a bucolic, beautiful neighborhood with big green trees and a nice yard and a nice safe home. That's what I grew up in. And it
Right.
was very, very nice. I grew up in Los Angeles, not far from UCLA itself, and like I said, had every advantage in life. Had a very promising childhood. I had all the sort of ingredients of success. My parents were married, still are married after 60 some years of marriage. I had a very stable home life. I had two older brothers. Yeah, they beat me up occasionally, but that's what it is to be the younger
Right.
brother. And I'd say that I probably only deserved it about 80% of the time. But
Right.
because I was the young, I was a troublemaker. I was going to needle
Yeah.
them as I could,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
try to run away and escape. So yeah, no, I got a hard time from my brothers mostly, but no, I had a very very great family, and everyone's very nice and very kind, and we all still get along. In fact, my family
Yeah.
still spends a lot of time together, and I think that's an important skill set actually to have in success. Family is. We often get frustrated with our family members. We find our family members sometimes tiring or annoying, and but I think part of the success that people are looking for in business also comes from being able to tolerate your family. Like recognize that you have to have a relationship with someone who you might not like what they do all the time. You might not agree with all their values, but still you need to make a long-term relationship work. That's an important skill set to have in business, and it's certainly helped me in my career.
Right. And that, when I was working at the course, I think that was one of the most awesome things that I've seen is, just the family there. And it was like seeing you and your dad and your brother and, your other brother go out and play together. It's just like, and then I got to, go with your dad and your brother. And I'm just like, the Winklers, like, they're just, they just do family things. And I thought that was so cool, to be your dad being the age that he is and still come out and play golf and, have fun with his son. So I thought that was it was really cool to see, because from the South, that's kind of what we live off of, family. So me being a family person that I am, and then get to move to Los Angeles and then see that same thing at the course was pretty awesome. So
Well, I'm very fortunate that way. I have a great relationship with my parents. My parents have always been incredibly supportive of me. Another
yeah,
reason why I don't think of myself as too much self-made, because I had so much support and I had a good family background behind me that helped me out. I don't think
right,
that's a necessary ingredient for all success, but it certainly helps, and it certainly helped in my case. Having that support, my father was had a very successful career in the movie industry. When I had hard questions about negotiations or about my career, I could go to him and ask him questions. And even though he wasn't familiar with academia, my chosen profession, he understood the human psyche. He understood how to negotiate. He understood how to protect yourself and pursue your interests in a cooperative relationship with others. And I learned all those lessons at his feet and been very fortunate that way.
right. That's awesome. So speaking of your dad, that kind of leads to my next question. With your dad being, Erwin Winkler, that's made these legendary movies. As a kid, did you play any roles in any movies, and which ones did you play in?
Yeah, there was a little bit. Yeah, I mean, my father has been a motion picture director and producer for over 60 years now, or just about 60 years now. It's been quite a long time. He's made a lot of movies, all the Rocky movies, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, The
Yeah.
Irishman. Just a lot of great, great films. I did have the opportunity when I was young to be in a few of his movies. No major parts that you're going to write home about, but I had
Right.
one speaking role where that was kind of fun that I like to remember, where I played the son of Liza Minnelli and Robert De Niro in a movie called New York, New York. Now, the movie was a terrible flop at the box office. No one saw this movie. It was directed by Martin Scorsese, and it was a musical. And in the way that only Martin Scorsese can do, it was a musical about a wife beater. So this didn't have a lot of potential for commercial success, as you can
Yeah.
imagine. But I got to play Robert De Niro's son and Liza Minnelli's son, and I still have some photographs in the file of me with Martin Scorsese when I was in fourth grade at the time, with Martin Scorsese, me with Robert De Niro looking very young. This is like 1977, so this is a long time ago,
Wow.
and they're classic pictures. And after that, I kind of didn't really pursue acting much. I knew film business wasn't for me. And, having already worked with Scorsese and De Niro, I had already reached the pinnacle of the acting profession already.
Right.
So there was nothing left for me to achieve.
That's what I was about to say. Meeting him at a young age was like, whoa. I mean, I've already met, one of the most legendary, greatest actors ever. I don't have anything else to go after. I've already reached the top in 1977. That's awesome. So, speaking of you not wanting to be in Hollywood and not do the movies and the acting, what made you create your own path and going into law and, exploring your gift and, you know, just going into law? What made you really cling to that, and what attracted you to law specifically and the age that we're in now?
Well, really, it was a little bit of luck that happened upon me when I really didn't know what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. I went and I decided to go to law school, not because I had some burning desire to be a lawyer, but I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go. And I knew a lawyer could be a good profession. And everyone always told me I argued too much anyway. So I figured that was a good place to go for someone like me. And thought maybe I would go be a prosecutor or something like that, or a criminal defense lawyer. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I thought I'd go to law school. And when I was in law school, I met a fellow in my first year class who wanted to be a law professor. And I had never once in my life considered the possibility of being an academic. Or if I had, it had been, oh, I'm never going to do that. I got to get out
Right.
of school as fast as possible. And I met him, and he became friends with me, and I realized that he was just his life, that his career, it just sounds so promising, and it sounded like such a good experience to be involved with sort of the intellectual side of the law, to be a professor, to teach students, to have that classroom experience where you get students getting that aha moment. And I thought it would be, I saw that it would be a richly rewarding career for me. And it was interesting because, again, I would never have thought that that was something that was an option for me. And one of the things I've learned in life is that you have to keep your eyes open for the opportunities that present themselves. Like you can't always say, well, this is my path and I'm going to go stick to it and go do it. There's something to be said about that kind of ambition and boldness and discipline and focus, but you have to be open to the opportunities that life provides you, and the doors that that the good Lord opens up for you and shows you as different
Right.
pathways. And that's what happened to me. And that pathway opened up, and I was like, and I tell you, the best decision, one of the best decisions I ever made, Chris, was to say, hey, that's an open door I never thought about. I'm going to check that out. When it would have
Yeah.
been so easy for me to just keep saying, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I'm going to do what I'm going to become I'm going to become a criminal defense lawyer or a prosecutor or something like that. And so I think that's definitely one of the lessons, is you gotta keep those eyes open for those opportunities and consider them when they present themselves.
Awesome. That was amazing. That was amazing answer. That helped me right now, just thinking about where I am in my life and just thinking about, just the opportunities that are always presented to me. So that was an amazing answer. So speaking of your education, like, going to the places that you went to, I'll let you speak on those. But, just going to those places, like, what was the journey like when you were able to move across the country and go to these different schools? Can you take us through
Yeah.
just your
Well,
educational journey?
yeah, I had an educational journey. I went around the world looking for education. I went to Georgetown for my undergraduate degree. Also studied for some time abroad. Studied in Paris. I'd always imagined that I would be an expat, that I would go live in France or some other country like that for the rest of my life, until I actually went and did it. And then I was like, I
No.
didn't really enjoy it that much. I didn't love living in
Right.
France. I didn't love being French. So, again, if you had asked me about what my life plan was, originally it was, oh, like, I'm going to go live in France and be an American in Paris. And then I actually got the opportunity to do it. And instead of closing my eyes to the fact that I wasn't really enjoying it that much, I was like, okay, this was a plan. It was not a good one, and we've realized it's not a good one. We're changing the plan, and that's okay too. And I think that's another good, important life lesson, like about the flexibility that comes with absorbing those life experiences and seeing whether what works for you and what doesn't work for you. What you think works for you may not really work. You just don't. I remember when I went to France. I had this image of what my life would be like, but it wasn't really based on actual facts about what my life would be like.
Right.
And I went there and I found myself, it turns out that I was kind of lonely and missing home, and had characteristics that I never thought that I had, which was a desire to return to my home and to where I grew up. And I've been fortunate enough to spend my life there since. I went to law school at NYU. I spent a few years in New York enjoying that. But ultimately, my education took me back to Los Angeles, and then I was fortunate to get a job teaching here at UCLA Law School, where my education continues. One of the great things about being a professor is that you never leave that educational environment. You're
Right.
still learning all the time. You're still around people who are pursuing ideas and interested in ideas, and most importantly, still get your summer vacations off.
Oh yeah. That's key right there. That's the main key right there. So for people that would want to branch out and go, go to the avenue that you've went to, what type of advice would you give to those people that say, hey, I don't know what I kind of want to do, but I think I want to do something in law?
Yeah, well, I think that it's definitely worth thinking about. Like anything in life, gathering information is always helpful. If you know lawyers, try to speak to some lawyers. If you don't know some lawyers, see if you know people who do know lawyers that you can talk to and get a sense of what their careers are like. There are a lot of different careers in the law. There's a lot of different roles that lawyers play in society, and there's a lot of different options for someone who wants to pursue that degree and get that specialized knowledge. I think that what I would say is, so in addition to the sort of that networking, um, uh, I would turn off the television. And by that, I
Yeah.
mean, don't watch shows about lawyers. Don't watch shows, like The Good Wife or The
Yeah.
Practice or some of these things and think, oh, that's what my life as a lawyer is going to be like. Because
Right.
that's not what your life as a lawyer is going to be
Yeah.
like. So I don't think that's a great way of thinking about it. But if you're someone who really likes intellectual challenges, who likes dealing with smart people, I think as a profession, the law is filled with a lot of smart people, and so it's an engaging place um, uh, to have a career and pursue your interests.
Awesome. So that leads right into my next question. Honestly, what was the key qualities that you learned about Adam that you didn't know before going to college? And then when you got to college, what did you learn the most about when it came to law? How did you develop your time management? How did you do study habits? What was your main focus, and what did you learn the most about you?
Well, I'll tell you, the biggest thing that I learned about me was that I was wrong about myself. That I had always thought, I'd never thought of myself as a good writer in particular, that I didn't have good writing skills. I was not a great student when I was in elementary school, when you do a lot of writing and you get a lot of grades on your writing. And I wasn't a
Right.
very good student in that part of my life. I wasn't until I was older and I got more serious about academia and serious about school that I started to really study. But back in elementary school, I was not good and I didn't do well in my English classes. And I would always have teachers tell me, or they'd write on while they're giving me a C or a D on the paper, they'd say, you're a very good writer, but this is not a good paper, right? But they'd
Right.
always say that you're a good writer, you're a good writer. And I never really took that seriously because I didn't get a good grade. How could you be a good writer?
Right.
And it took me actually through higher education, getting the opportunity to write a lot, get the opportunity, especially when I was a young academic trying to write my way up into the world of academia, where it's a publisher-parish business. So you gotta produce written scholarship. It was finally when I started turning that, I said, you know what? It turns out I'm actually good at this. Like I can write.
Yeah.
I'm a good writer. And it was something that I didn't know about myself. I didn't believe about myself, even though some people had told me about that early on. And so sometimes it's having that critical self reflection and trying to see what skill sets you really have and what sets you don't. I do think it's one of the most important things for someone who's trying to figure out a career, where to go, what to do, is not to think of the conclusion. Oh, I want to be a lawyer, or I want to be a judge, or I want to be a business person, or I want to be this, but instead to make it more granular and to think, what are the skill sets that I have that I'm good at, that I'd like to be using more? And if you can identify those skill sets that you're good at, that you have potential, that you can develop, that you think that you're a little bit better than the next person at those skills, then you can try to find a job that uses those skill sets. And so it's kind of like reverse engineering. Instead of thinking about the conclusion, think about the skills that you have and try to figure out which jobs are jobs in which you can use those skills. And for me, writing was a key part of it. I had to really come to terms with the fact that I had some writing skills that I didn't ever realize I had.
Wow. That's amazing. So, I mean, the skill set is the key thing that you learned about yourself, was just your habits, and being able to write was the thing that you learned, and it was just like, whoa, I'm really good at this. So that's awesome. So that leads right into my next question. What was the most challenging part of your journey? What was one of the things where you said, I don't know, like, going back to when you were in France and you were lonely and stuff. So what was the most challenging part of your journey in school and college?
Well, I remember when decided I wanted to be a law professor. I finally said, you know what, I'm going to look into this. This is something that's worth looking into. And at my law school, there was one professor who was sort of like the guru for students who wanted to go become law professors, where you'd go and you'd meet with him and he would talk to you about the process and he would support you on the job market and things like that. And I set up my first meeting with this guy. And granted, I wasn't confident that I wanted to be a law professor. This is my first meeting with someone thinking about
Right.
it. And he told me, you're never going to get a job, he told me. He says you
Yeah.
can't get a job teaching in law professor. It's too hard. The jobs are not plentiful. You can't get a job. And I said, "Well, okay, well, I'm going to still pursue it. You know, I really want to do it." And then later on, people would tell me, well, as of my resume, I was building up my resume and I was becoming more
Yeah.
attractive as a potential law professor. People would say, okay, you can become a law professor, but you should get ready. You're not going to be able to live in Los Angeles. Like there's very few jobs in Los Angeles. You got to go where the jobs are.
Uh,
And generally pretty good advice. You go where the jobs are, but you're not going to live in Los Angeles. And it turns out, cut to 30 years later, I'm a law professor. I have tenure at UCLA Law School, and I'm in Los
yeah.
Angeles.
Right.
And I think that, life and charting out your career path is sometimes a fine line between listening to what other people have to say and ignoring what other people have to
Right.
say.
Yeah.
It's a fine line. You don't want to take like, I'm never going to listen to what other people have to say. You can't take that approach because you'll fail because you're not paying attention to the obvious failings that you have. At the same time, there's always going to be naysayers. One of those naysayers is right here in your own noggin, and you got to overcome those naysayers too, and persevere.
Wow. That's awesome. So speaking of naysayers, that kind of leads right into my next question too, honestly. So speaking of naysayers, and after that guy told you that, did you, after you graduated, did you see yourself, being in the experience and being on the Michael Jackson case? What was the experience like that in 95 when you were able to work on that case?
Oh my God, this was a crazy case. So right after I graduated law school, I wasn't ready to go on the law teaching job market. You got to publish some articles. You got to get yourself ready to go on the job market for
Yeah.
a law professor. And I wasn't ready. So I went and I practiced law for a couple of years, right? Earn a little bit of money. It's always a nice thing to do after 8 years of education, which is what I had been in higher education. I was ready to make a little bit of money. And so I practiced law in Los Angeles at a law firm. And I was assigned to a litigation team where one of our clients was Michael Jackson. And Michael Jackson at the time was being charged in a civil suit with molesting a young boy. And this was the first time those allegations had ever arisen with regards to Michael Jackson. And I was put on the case. Now, granted, I was the lowest person on the totem pole, right? First
Right.
year out of law school, I'm right there at the very bottom. I'm not making any decisions. Michael
Yeah.
Jackson's not picking up the phone and calling me and asking me for advice. I don't want to
Right.
misrepresent what was going on. I was in the back room, typing stuff up.
Yeah.
Uh, but it was a remarkable case because I would go home and the tabloid television shows would be featuring Michael Jackson. This case was it was on top of the news night and day. And it was really a fascinating experience to work on one of these high profile cases. But one of the things it really did, it reaffirmed in me my desire to avoid the entertainment industry. Even as a lawyer, I was touching the entertainment industry when I was representing Michael Jackson. And just all of the craziness and all of the media attention and just to see how even people at the law firm would react to Michael Jackson walking through the door like he was some kind of, godlike figure.
Yeah.
It just seemed over the top to me, and it just sort of reaffirmed my desire to really pursue academia and not let myself fall into the trap of becoming, okay, I'm a lawyer, but now I'll become an entertainment lawyer, right? Just
Right.
like do the entertainment industry, but through a different angle.
Yeah.
And that case kind of helped propel me back into academia. And it was an amazing, eye-opening kind of case. But very happy to have had that case push me right out of the law
Right.
and right into academia.
So, when I read that, I read it on your Wikipedia. I said, "Whoa, I got to ask him about this," because I think, I wasn't born at the time, but that was, I actually started seeing how the documentaries were coming out. I think last year or something like that, and I was just like, "Whoa," I didn't know that. I never even knew about it. So for me, and then when I seen that you actually worked on, it, I'm like, I gotta ask him about Michael Jackson. I
It
think that
was a
would just
crazy
be,
time. And he was
yeah,
at the very, very pinnacle of his stardom at the time. And
right,
it was a pretty devastating case. And um, it was devastating to everybody involved, to Michael Jackson, to the children involved. I
Yeah.
will say at the time we did a lot of investigation and we didn't find any evidence that any other children other than this one child that was making the allegation had been victimized by Michael Jackson. Subsequent revelations have come out and I think cause anyone involved in that case to maybe second guess and maybe think maybe we missed some things. But
Right.
yeah, it's definitely, there's no doubt that it was a situation that has caused a lot of heartache and discomfort for people
Right.
for years. I don't know whether there was actual abuse that happened or not. I can't speak to that. I was not there, but it does seem that there's a number of people with very compelling stories that cause us to reassess how we think about someone like Michael Jackson. Maybe not quite the godlike figure that the people in the law firm imagined him to be.
Right. So, that kind of leads, I mean, you kind of already answered it, but, that kind of moves me towards my next question is, once you got to see that side of the world, what made you so much more attracted to academia?
Because I saw that side of the world.
Yeah.
That's enough. That's enough
Yeah.
to push anyone the other way.
Right.
No, actually, you know what? The most disturbing thing I learned on that case was it was remarkable how many parents of young children were willing to allow their children to sleep at the Neverland Ranch in the bedroom, in the bed with a grown man who is not related to them. In
Right.
this case, Michael Jackson, because there was no doubt, there was not much argument at the time, right, that he had slept with a lot of children in the same bed.
Right.
He had always insisted that it was, and almost everyone who had been in his bed had said that nothing had ever happened sexual, that he was kind of too much of a childlike figure, Michael Jackson. That was kind of the attitude at the time. But to see so many parents who were willing to allow that to happen, when I think, like, as a parent, like, there's no way I'm letting my daughter stay at some strange man's house, even if he's a celebrity, and sleep in
Right.
some man's bed. Like, that's just not gonna happen. And yet a lot of parents were willing to do that because they wanted that piece of Michael Jackson like everybody else did. And it was really disheartening and disillusioning. But ultimately, I became an academic not to run away from Michael Jackson, although that's probably part of it too. But because I just really love this lifestyle. I love the idea of being in the world of ideas, of contributing to how the world thinks about some of the major problems of the day. And I've been fortunate to be able to devote my time and my energies in the field of constitutional law, where I do my research and my scholarship on big pressing social problems and legal problems such as guns and gun control in America, and corporate power and the ability of corporations to kind of to drown out other voices in the electoral process. These are the kind of things I love to work on because they're really passions of mine and they're important issues for society. And now what I love doing about my job is that I get to help shape how those problems are understood, and that's a real honor.
Wow. So speaking of constitutional law, what made you get involved in that, and what made you really say, okay, I have an idea, there's some things that I want to talk about, and I know they're very relevant to what's going on now?
Well, no doubt. One of my inspirations was the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education. I read that as a law student and was inspired to think about how the law can be a force for change and for good in society, to bring equality, equal rights, and equal dignity to all citizens. And so I was certainly inspired by Brown versus Board of Education, similar cases like Reynolds versus Sims, which is the case with a big case where the court said that protected the right to vote for people, and I thought those were meaningful moments. I've since come to learn, and I've written books about this too, that really the Brown versus Board of Education, that's the exceptional case in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has traditionally been a bastion of conservative protection for privilege and property, and that Brown is the exception. But nonetheless, it was the exception that inspired me to really focus my energies in that space. And I will say 4 years of Donald Trump, I don't know what the politics are your listeners are, but I'll just say this for my own politics, 4 years of Donald Trump and what he's been doing to the Constitution, I'm ready to move to New Zealand. So.
Well, I'm gonna say this. My podcast is, I want people to Seriously, I want people to come over here and be free and allowed to speak them, be themselves. I don't want people to be shy and hide away from who they are, which is fine. So, no, I definitely understand that. And just like, the equal rights in America is what you're right, though. It definitely has to grow. And the idea that you have created has been amazing. And, just thinking of that, you wrote the book, Why the Corporations. I mean, we the corporations, not why, but we the corporations. And what was some of your reasonings for writing the book, and what awareness did you want people to be aware of?
Sure. Yeah. No, that book. I'm very proud of that book. We the Corporations: How American Businesses Won Their Civil Rights. Came out in 2018, and I was really inspired to write the book by a Supreme Court decision. The Supreme Court's decision in 2010 in a case called Citizens United. A lot of people have heard about this case. It's a case where the Supreme Court said that corporations have the same First Amendment right as you and me to spend their money on election ads, giving corporations the ability to really to sway our elections. And I was curious, how did corporations, which are not people, come to have the same fundamental rights as you and me? It just didn't make a
Right.
lot of sense to me. And so I wanted to look into that. As a law student and even as a law professor, I had learned and taught about individual rights, states' rights, immigrant rights, civil rights, women's rights. We had never talked about corporate rights. To what extent do corporations have rights under the Constitution? And when I did my research, I was really shocked, Chris. I found that the story was much older than I had ever imagined, and that Citizens United was really just the most recent chapter in a 200-year battle by business corporations to win the
Wow.
rights of people, and win the rights of individuals. And that the truth is while we think of the Supreme Court as a protector of bulwark to protect minority rights from being, overrun by the majority. What I found, at least in these cases, is that while the court has been very hesitant to expand civil rights and women's rights and gay rights, it's been very eager and at the forefront of expanding corporate rights. And one of the reasons why we have such a capitalist society, a commercial culture, is in part because the Supreme Court has said that corporations are entitled to the same fundamental rights as you and me, rights that they use to challenge laws that regulate business in the public interest or in the interest of consumers. And so this really became it started with one case, the Citizens United case, but became a much deeper sort of dive into American history and how American corporations have really sort of turned the Constitution into a tool to protect them from us.
Right. So speaking of corporations, so what fundamental practices as Americans, like what do we need to do better, to approach and be able to change that in a way that they shouldn't have the same rights as me that works for the corporation, you know, how do we make that change?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And one thing we know is sort of we learn in constitutional law classes is about, when we think about how social change happens, it happens a variety of ways. But probably the most important way is mobilizing, right? Is getting together with other like-minded people and fighting for what you believe in. There is currently a push to amend the Constitution to overturn Citizens United and to say that Congress can regulate corporate money in elections, and that corporations don't have the same First Amendment rights as you and me. Those efforts have been supported by, I think, about 20 states have signed on to such efforts to amend the Constitution. So people can be involved in that part of the mobilization effort. People can be active in smaller spaces. You can be active in trying to push the corporations that you frequent. That is to say, the brands that you purchase and that you favor. You can push those brands to support the politics you want too. One idea is that the amendment idea is to take the corporation out of politics and mobilizing for that. But the other possibility is to say, well, corporations are in politics. There's not much we can do about it in the meantime. I at least want the corporations that might be listening to me as a consumer to have the right politics. And so, if you see, a law being passed in a state that you think is wrong, and you support a brand that's based in that state, then you should, send out a tweet and say, hey, look, name that company and say, I don't want to buy products from this company while you're doing this business with the state. It's doing this awful thing to people.
Right.
There's mobilization. That's a key way of going about and doing it, and being active and politically involved. Like the only way change ever happens is through serious political engagement. That's what corporations have done, right? That's why they're so powerful, because they're
Right.
persistent, they're rich, and they work it. Now,
Right.
we might not all be rich, but we can be persistent and we can work it just as well as they can.
Wow. Great answer. That was a really great answer. So, as far as this year in 2020, and you got to see a glimpse of the corporations and, the whole Black Lives Matter movement, what would you say what, when it came to the corporations and you wrote the book, We the Corporations, what was your stance on the corporations and their basically their partnership with the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, I do think that one of the things that I hope is enduring from the Black Lives Matter movement is the kind of corporate support for African Americans and for the victims of police violence that we've seen in the wake of Black Lives Matter movement. For many corporations and businesses and other entities, there's been a reckoning where former employees or current employees have signed on to Instagram feeds or other websites or whatnot that detail the practices of some often of these companies and ways in which they're not as that they're often much more hostile to people of color than they pretend to be. And I do think that Black Lives Matter may be a turning point, at least this summer of Black Lives Matter protests might be a turning point in getting people to be a little bit more conscious about the way in which privilege is working in society. And hopefully corporations are going to keep following that. But honestly, the businesses are going to do what they need to do to make money. Like
Right.
that's how businesses work, right? They're not here to make us all feel good, and that for good or ill. I mean, we could change corporations, but currently the way they're constituted, it's about making money, and so it's incumbent upon us as employees, as consumers, as people who are investors in companies, perhaps, is to make our voices heard and to make those companies know that their customers or employees or investors are not happy unless they take the right stand, unless they do things to really promote equality and opportunity for all people, and not just give lip service to it.
Right.
But again, it's incumbent upon us. The corporations are malleable, but we've got to do the mallying. I don't know, the
Right.
shaping. Yes.
Yeah. Right. So, speaking of We the Corporations, you wrote that book, and then you wrote a second book, called The Gunfight. And what was your main key focus that you wanted to bring when it came to gun rights, and what did you want people to learn reading the book?
Sure. Well, Gunfight, it was published a few years ago, and it takes a look at the history of the right to bear arms in America, and looks at how we've always in American history balanced gun rights with gun safety. That we've always had an individual right to bear arms, but contrary to the view of some, gun control is a part of the story of gun politics in America too. That the founding fathers had gun control laws. The Wild West, which is sort of we think about as the haven for American guns. Frontier towns in the Wild West, they had gun control laws, the most strict gun control laws in the nation. And that one of the reasons I wrote the book is so that we can recapture that sense of balance, that we can have an individual right to bear arms and have good and effective gun control too. It's not one or the other. And too often in American politics, we're kind of confronted with that. It's either this or that. If you can have gun rights, but not gun control, or you can have gun control, but no gun rights. And I think we can do better than that. And I think we can find a middle way where we balance those two issues. The guns aren't going anywhere. There's like over 400 million guns in America at this point. They're
Right.
not going anywhere. Whether you call it a right or don't call it a right, people are going to have guns in America. The key is whether we can do more to keep guns out of the hands of the people who shouldn't have them, and do more to reduce suicides and other injuries and deaths that come from gun violence.
So what would be the policies that we would need to put in to have a more of a more structured background for someone like, that doesn't need it? What policies would we need to develop?
Yeah,
Develop.
no, it's a great point. One of our problems is that our gun policies really are about 50 different states have their own gun policies. And then you have the federal government that has the supreme over all of them, but only has a handful of policies on a handful of kinds of issues. And so as a result, in the states, you have a lot of disagreement. And because guns easily transfer from one state to another, the state gun laws are not nearly as effective. We could use a one really effective federal gun control policy that's nationwide, that covers most of the key issues in American gun politics today to be effective, honestly. We're not going to get that. What are the kinds of policies that we could use to get there? We could have better background checks. We could have real background checks that are conducted on every gun purchase. We could have, it's not necessarily about necessarily more laws. I think sometimes lawmakers and legislators and reformers think the answer is always more law. Sometimes it's more law, sometimes it's less law. For instance, our current laws ban felons from possessing firearms for life, even if the felony conviction was for something completely nonviolent, like obstruction of justice or perjury or insider trading or something like that. It's not really clear that nonviolent felons should be banned for having guns for the rest of their lives. So that's an example of somewhere where we might need a little less law than what we currently have. And universal background checks might be an area where we need to have more laws. We also need better federal law enforcement in this space. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the main federal law enforcement agency, has never been terribly effective. It's been burdened by very low funding levels and low morale, and probably needs some serious reform as an agency to be more effective.
So, a popular pro-gun argument is that guns are the great equalizer for women. What would you comment back to that, and to that statement, and how do you see gender play a role in those conversations on gun control?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that there's ways in which having a firearm can be a great equalizer.
Yeah,
Someone who's trained to use it, a woman or another person in a vulnerable group, can use that weapon as a valid tool of self-defense. And that's why we have the right to bear arms, and why people should be able to get access to firearms if they're law-abiding people. And because self-defense is a real concern. Um, Now, of course, whether, if we look at demographic numbers, whether it's really a great equalizer for women or not, I'm not sure. There's a lot of data out there that show where if there's a gun in the household, it's most likely to be used against the people in the household. And unfortunately, often to be used against the man, by the man in the household, against the woman in the household. And there's
right.
so many women who are victims of domestic violence, and guns only make that worse. So guns can be a great equalizer in some situation. Some situation they can be a great oppressor as well. Um, but I think at the end of the day, people should have a right to self-defense, and people do have that right and should be able to have a gun for self-defense. And I think it's important when we think about what kinds of gun regulations we could have or need, we avoid the assumption that any gun control means you're going to take away people's ability to have a gun. Um, I don't think that's what this is. That's not really what it's about. Even states that have good and effective gun control laws, or more gun control laws, everyone can still get a gun. Maybe the one exception is New York City, which has very, very restrictive laws. But other than that, we can have an individual right to bear arms where people who are law-abiding can get access to guns and yet still have good and effective background checks. Those things are not incompatible to me.
Right. So, going back to the Constitution and, speaking back on that, you were saying that we needed to amend the Constitution, and, so in your life right now, and you've been in academia, and the things that you learned through your study in academia, what does the Constitution mean to you?
Well, the Constitution is such an important document and such an important part of our history. It's important because the Constitution is enduring, and it provides a basis for us to identify our shared values and what's most important in life. And I think that's a valuable tool. And there's a reason why Americans revere the Constitution. Um, at the same time, the Constitution has many gaps and is hardly a perfect document. It wasn't perfect when it was formed, and the framers made a deal with the devil to keep slavery alive and to protect it in the Constitution. And it is not perfect, even though those provisions have been overturned by the Civil War and the subsequent amendments. The Constitution is too easily used as a tool of oppression rather than a tool of liberation. And I'd like to see the Constitution become more of a tool for liberation than it has been in the past.
So what key things do you think that would need to be rewritten in the Constitution to make that liberation and allow American peoples to become liberated?
Yeah, I'm not even sure it's a matter of being rewritten as much as just reinterpreted. Like there's a lot
Right.
of provisions that the Supreme Court has just interpreted in a way that completely guts them. You know, for instance, there's a provision in the Constitution that requires state governments to have a Republican form of government. And I don't mean like Republican, like GOP Republican, but a Republican form of government one. And that's a clause that the Supreme Court has basically said, well, we don't know what that means, so we're just going to ignore it. And so it's a dead letter in the Constitution. There's no
Right.
reason why that provision should be dead letter. We should come to terms, try to figure out what it means, what the framers are trying to accomplish with that. How can we use it in a way that respects the values today? For instance, when you see laws that are states passing voter ID laws that are really just designed to reduce the ability of people to vote rather than really go after election fraud. We're going to see a lot of laws passed in the coming years because of this Trump fiasco, where under the name of preventing election fraud, we're going to really crack down and make it harder for people to vote, especially people of color. Again, I think that, you know, a good, valid interpretation of the Republican Guarantee Clause might be to say those laws are unconstitutional because you no longer have a Republican form of government if you're actively seeking to prevent people from voting. That's not what we think of as a Republican form of government. Now, that's just one possibility. There's a lot of different provisions out there. The Supreme Court could make it easier for people to bring civil rights claims, people to bring discrimination claims. The truth is the court has interpreted the Constitution in ways that really make the Constitution useful for the powerful. What it needs to do is interpret the Constitution in ways that make it more useful for the powerless.
Wow. So that kind of leads me to my next question: is do you think the Constitution has failed us as American people?
Well, it may be that we've failed the Constitution. I don't know. um,
No.
no, I don't think it's failed us, but I think it often, you know, there are key moments, key things that that the court has done with the Constitution. The Constitution, really, at the end of the day, is only as valuable as we, the people, make it today.
Right.
Right? If we ignore the Constitution, it's just a piece of parchment. It's not going to really do anything. Um, I think we've seen, for instance, in the battle over the 2020 election, that the Constitution's played an important role in stopping a form of corruption. We have one presidential candidate who's trying to overturn the election, steal the election results, ignore the valid votes of people. And what's the recourse that the president has had to do that is by going to court. And he's been rejected time and time again in court. And that's a way in which maybe you think that the Constitution helps us out, that the requirements that have been read into the Constitution, for instance, that people show that there's a real valid injury that they have suffered before they can come into court, those things can actually work for us. So the Constitution ultimately, at the end of the day, is a bunch of vague generalities that most of the meaning of which is really going to come from we the people and how we interpret that document. And so I think we don't need to change the text of the First Amendment. We just have to read it so it doesn't protect corporations in the same way, give corporations equal rights to you and me, Chris, when last I checked, our bank accounts didn't look like the corporations.
Right. Most definitely not. So, it's been an amazing interview. I've learned a lot and been able to hear your story has been incredible. So this is a conclusion, and it kind of leads me to my last question is what does be great mean to you? And,
I think it's a great phrase, and it's such an important one. And it's like, it's an inspiration every morning to be great, to be good, like to bring out the best of yourself. We all have a good side and a bad side. And so often we let that, the little devil on this one say, sleep a little bit later. Or this one says, eat a little bit more junk food. Don't bother working out. Or why focus on that part of your job? Do something else that's easier, or make some phone calls, or procrastinate. We've all got
yeah,
that inside us. I
right.
know I've been battling it since day one. I think be great is important. It's an encouragement, an injunction to all of us to be our best selves. Like when you wake up in the morning, you can listen to the negatives or you can listen to the positives. Be great means listen to the positives. And if yesterday you didn't do such a good job of that and you listen to the negatives, today's a brand new day for you to be great. And you can be great today, even if yesterday you weren't. So I love that motto.
My man. So last thing is, where can people find you? Where can they search you up? If people want to go and ask questions, people want to get into law, where can they find you at?
After hearing all this, they probably just want to like wring my neck or something, Chris. I don't know if I need to give them the information. But no, I'm a professor at UCLA School of Law. They maintain a web page for me. So you can always just type in that into Google or your favorite search engine. You'll come up with my bio, my contact information, my Twitter feed. I'm at Twitter at Adam Winkler. And so if you want to follow my tweets, you can check that out. But those are the best ways to get in touch with me or to follow along.
Yes, sir. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining the Be Great Inspiration podcast.
Chris, thanks so much for having me on. Real pleasure. Be great.